I slipped on some rocks and went down and I sprained my ankle and my knee pretty badly. And a week and a half after that, I was in the studio with Brothers Corn with Torald on guitar. We had a drummer and we had a bass player, and we were recording these new tonics that we've created. And I limped into the recording studio with this sore knee and this sore ankle. And after 3 hours of doing the recording, it made me so happy. I can't even tell you, being in a garage studio with 5 guys doing rock and roll. And when it came time to walk away from the microphone and walk outside, I strode out. I had no pain. I had no limping. I was like 100%. And I was like, oh my God, I just healed myself with my own rock and roll tonics. I originally created it for vanity. I originally created it as something to like use on the face and the neck, and to just kind of like gua sha, but vibrating. And that was kind of how we put it into the marketplace. But people discovered that it was helping them get rid of their food allergies and sensitivities, that it could be used to speed healing of wounds and injuries, that if you put it on a bug bite immediately and just let the vibration run down, it takes the itch out instantly. So just remember the importance of keeping the balance of giving and receiving. And even if that's just graciously receiving a compliment or letting somebody buy you lunch, right? Because sometimes that knee-jerk rejection of receiving comes up. And I think it's really important to remember that gracious receiving gives dignity to the act of giving. If you end up with a whole bunch of givers and no receivers, what are we even doing?
Welcome to the Gamma Seeker broadcast. This is a broadcast because we are emitting a frequency and we are emitting a field. We're going to cover some topics that I think are incredibly important for humanity to see ourselves with the muscles outside of the body. And when I was introduced to Eileen's work, I was already into musical breathwork. I had already established the copy for my brand, and I seem like an apprentice of yours, Eileen. The words mighty, the words harmonic, resonance, the flow. You and I are one and the same kin. And honestly, I sound like I've already been training under your programs, which I have a secret desire to do here in the next year, because the mapping and the language that you've created about the toroidal field outside of the body, to me, is the next layer of healing. And your case studies on, instantaneous healing, to me, with absolutely no pain, no medication, and it happening simultaneously, needs to be looked at. It needs to be experimented with. And it's a tuning of the field. Just like my piano, they don't come once and say, okay, you're good forever. They say, they come once and say, hey, I'll see you in 3 to 6 months. And I see your work as this maintenance exercise of bringing coherence to the field. You got into it with pure curiosity. I want to know, what have you been researching and find most fascinating right now in your field?
Right now, I'm actually very captivated by the human voice and what we can do with our own voices from the inside out. I've spent almost 30 years playing with tuning forks and seeing what we can do from the outside in. And when you combine the tuning forks with the voice, you kind of have a complete package of sonic medicine that is so useful for so many.
You've developed this word sonic anatomy. And as much as I've scoured your website and you're seeing a lot of the other podcasts, I feel still very mysteriously drawn to it. Can you elaborate a little bit about the sonic anatomy word that you're developing?
The sonic anatomy work is a partnership with 2 brothers, Isaac and Torald Corn. And together we created a program called Sing the Body Electric. And it's a combination of tuning, of breath work, and these 42 tones of the sonic anatomy, which are basically sounds that resonate in very specific areas of our body. And this is completely our own work. We didn't look to any other previous models that associate different sounds with different chakras or different body parts. Basically, the 3 of us sat around and played with different soundings for different body parts: the liver, the spleen, the stomach, the knees, the feet. And by consensus, when the three of us hit something that resonated for all three of us, we declared it so. And these sounds, they're baby sounds, a lot of them. They're like ma, pa, wa, ga, gu, gi, and very, very simple sounds. But when we tone them, and what we do is we tone them, but we also turn them into what we call musical tonics, which are little melodies of these sounds, and turn them into songs and get people to sing with them. Because what I've discovered is that so many people want to sing and don't feel at liberty to do that. We're all shut down in so many ways, right? Life creates a lot of contraction in so many of us, so much shut down from school, from parenting, from siblings, that we become sort of like pipe organs, where we have clogged pipes, where we have keys that don't work, and we have just a kind of shutdown in our instrument. You can't, as a musician, that you can't get good sound out of an instrument that's out of tune. And so these are a way to get your human instrument in tune in this very sandbox kind of way. So we lead people through the tones and then the tonics, and then we get to songs, and suddenly people are like, oh my gosh, I can sing. So to liberate people to that freedom is incredibly satisfying to do.
Yeah, and it's a wild thing to have a group of people singing around you too, isn't it?
I love it so much. I really do. I've gone into this not so that I can be a better singer or performer, but just so that my voice can be solid enough to provide an anchor or platform for people to sound with me. And the feeling of being together in groups of any size, singing and toning together, it's electric. It really is. And it's gratifying, and it makes people happy. The looks that we see on people's faces, and they're just open and beaming and embodied and empowered, is just incredibly, incredibly gratifying.
So as a Mighty Breath teacher and a vocalist myself, I often tell people there's only 5 vowels. So like if you want to learn how to sing, there's only, really 5 paintbrushes that you can get really good at outside of the consonants to learn how to make shape and vibrate. So for you to say ma, pe, me, it's like a, e, a, o, u. Those are the only little crayons in the crayon box that we have, regardless of the language we're singing in. And I joke all the time that the greatest drug I've ever done is spelt for 90 minutes. It's taken me to a place that I've never touched before. And it's very, I feel like I'm soaring down from the heavens. Like I have reached the outer part of my soul and floated down. Can you kind of speak to it? Because not many people have stood in a room with hundreds of people singing together. And what's that kind of experience for you in your Biofield during those events and workshops?
Well, what it's making me think of is that, because we were at Confluence together 3 weeks ago, I slipped on some rocks and went down, and I sprained my ankle and my knee pretty badly. And a week and a half after that, I was in the studio with the Brothers Corn, with Torald on guitar. We had a drummer and we had a bass player, and we were recording these new tonics that we created. And our first set of tonics was more sort of classic sound healing, sort of relaxing, dating. But after we did our first album, it's called The Vital Voice Explorer Volume 1, and I listened to it all the way through. I was like, I need more rock and roll than this. Like, I need more grit. And this sort of new agey thing is not my jam. And so the ones that we created, we have ones like that are called Sacred Rage and From Powerlessness to Power. And they're very embodied, very belted out rock and roll kinds of tonics. And I limped into the recording studio with this sore knee and this sore ankle. And after 3 hours of doing the recording, it made me so happy. I can't even tell you, being in a garage studio with 5 guys doing rock and roll. And when it came time to walk away from the microphone and walk outside, I strode out. I had no pain. I had no limping. I was like 100%. And I was like, oh my God, I just healed myself with my own rock and roll tonics. Realize that that's really my happy place, is in exactly what you said. There's a kind of expansion, a vitalization. It's a high. that's really kind of incomparable. And I really came out of that with a more pleased attitude. Like, that is what I want to do. And that is what makes me feel great. And so taking those powerful tonics into groups, we had the opportunity to do it the very next day. And to see so many people just really setting themselves free in a structure that doesn't require you to be on pitch, in key, sound good. It's almost like a primal screaming, this one we have called Sacred Rage, but it's in this very specific framework and format where each one of these sounds has placement in the body and emotional significance. So you get to express yourself without having to get encumbered with words, which is where I think a lot of people get hung up. They can do the tones pretty well, and comfortably. We can sit around and go wah together and everyone's okay with that. But then to make the step all the way up to a song with words is where a lot of people stumble. And so to have this half step of these toning songs just makes that next step up to actual songs a lot easier.
So the ear is capable of perceiving almost 1,400 tones. And in classical standard American music, we play about 72 maximum with our octaves and our half steps. And I always felt like you probably had the most well-developed ear because of all of your tuning fork time. And I'm curious what your relationship is like to microtonals and how you maybe speak upon that, because you are so well elucidated on, exactly which frequency is a C versus a C sharp. So what is it like for you in music? Is it a lot more free than our standard octave system?
That's an interesting question. I find the Western musical system to be incredibly limiting. And I'm not a musician. In fact, my first set of tuning forks that I used for many years, C, D, E, F, G, A, B, when I would use tuning forks, when I use them, I'm listening to the changes in the overtones and the undertones, and I'm not really paying so much attention to the fundamental. And so you could strike some forks and ask me what note they were, and I wouldn't be able to tell you because my ear is trained to find the dissonance or the consonance in the overtones and undertones. And I don't have perfect pitch. But as a consequence of not being a trained musician, I feel like I have much more liberty in my musical expression because I haven't been trained into that system. And I find that it becomes a limiter for so many musicians and they get stuck. Even this argument about 432 versus 440, I'm like, what about every other frequency? What about every other combination of frequencies, right? People just go into these little boxes that music puts them in. And yet tonal expression can be so wide and far-ranging when you take away those kinds of rules and constraints.
Yes. I have to ask this question because I have my own hypothesis on the answer. What is the exercise that expands a biofield more than anything else you've found?
Well, one of the things that I found really interesting has to do with location, actually, like where you are. There are these things called telluric currents that are earth energy flows of magnetic fields, basically. It's like the river system, the water system, only it's magnetic flows. These are also called ley lines or dragon lines. They're the same thing. And in order to maintain their containment and not spill out all over the place, they have double layer membranes that encapsulate them, just like our biofield does. So the magnetic field of our body is bounded by a torus, and that torus has a double layer membrane where there's additional charge. So through learning dowsing with a geomancer, I years ago discovered that I had a telluric current that ran through the property that we lived on. It runs along the spine of the Green Mountains in Vermont. And we discovered through using dowsing rods that when you stood outside the line, your field was, maybe 6 feet away from the body, like 12-foot diameter. When you stood in the when you stood inside the dragon line, your field expanded to twice the size. But when you stood in that membrane, your field got 3 times bigger. And so many of these sacred places, cathedrals and things like that, stone circles, are built where these telluric currents cross. So there is a natural amplification of our own energies when we go into these spaces. So when you combine being in, quote, sacred places of high earth energy with something like toning. In fact, we're in the process of setting up a Toning in Cathedrals in Europe tour next year.
I want to go.
It's going to be so cool. We're looking at Prague, the UK, London. Like there's definitely, it's starting to come together. So we're very excited about the opportunity of creating specific tonics for these spaces that resonate the space and our bodies. And so I'm expecting a pretty massive expansion of our own sense of self in these spaces, making these specific sounds.
Okay, so I'm going to ask the question again, but differently. Outside of standing on ley lines and dragon lines, what's the other thing that you've seen influence the expansion of someone's field?
Say authenticity.
Okay.
That when people are authentic, immediate, raw, real, present, grounded, that's the most forceful expansion there is. Because so many of us contract ourselves. We make ourselves small. This is epidemic, really. We make our voices small, we make our energy small. Women in particular are always saying, sorry, I exist. Sorry, I'm coming downstairs at the same time as you. Sorry. It's so contractive. It's so diminishing. But if we can stand in our own authentic, no nonsense, plain and simple authenticity, that is expansive. Something that I've witnessed as a clinician for 3 decades is that people who have things like fibromyalgia are always holding themselves back. Why do you hurt? Because you're big, you're huge, you're powerful, and it takes a lot of energy to hold yourself back. And that's why you have pain floating all around, because your field is contracted. So just being real and maybe even uncensored, but in a diplomatic way, I think that a lot of people have a belief that authentic equals offensive. And it's sort of like an either or. Well, if I'm authentic and real, I'm going to offend people, I'm going to hurt people. And so they hold back without realizing that you can be both kind, diplomatic, considerate, and real at the same time.
You know, I would apply a lot of those adjectives to you after hanging out with you for a couple hours. Everything that you just said are like, yeah, that's how I would break you down. It was very interesting to sit down with someone I had never met in person, and we just dove right into the most vulnerable aspects of what both of us were going through, and we were troubleshooting our ways through it. And it was so refreshing after I left you. I was like, wow, it's like we've been friends for eternity. Like we just picked up where we left off. I want to ask, what's the biggest field of someone that you've experienced? Have you ever been just like blown away by someone before?
Yeah, my husband, actually. That was when we were playing with dowsing rods outside, exploring the dragon line. He wasn't even in the dragon line. And I was like, let me douse your field. And I started walking towards him from about 10 feet away. And dowsing rods will kind of cross like this when they're like, no, go back. And I kept going back and back and back. And I finally was like maybe 30 feet away before they finally swung open. And I was like, wow. And he was like, I'll tell you what, my husband is the most authentic person I know. Like, he doesn't hold anything back. He is so real. He is so embodied. He's been riding dirt bikes since he was 5. And he's just an incredible motorcycle rider. You know, it's a very athletic sport to ride dirt bikes the way that he's ridden them. And I think one of the things that really attracted me to him was that through my childhood experience, I feel like I got broken into a million pieces, and those pieces got scattered all around. I lost my center. I lost my sense of self. And I had to spend so much time on the healing journey, finding, retrieving, putting these pieces back together, finding my own center. And he never lost himself. Like, he was always in his body, always in his truth, always unapologetically just himself. And I think that is why he has such a big field. You know, he's just very embodied, very real, very unapologetic for who he is. And, you know, it's been great for me to be around that because we get the medicine of the people that we're near.
You get to resonate off of that dynamic giant that he gets to be.
Exactly.
And there's something to be said for athletes that put their life at risk. Like, I was a golfer. And like golf requires a bit of trajectory and telepathy over space and time. And like you're holding and harnessing a goal that's, 250 yards away from you. But when you're on a motorcycle, every cell of your being is at risk. And there's this like sense of heightened perception and awareness. Working with elite athletes, like we often talk about Michael Jordan and his ability to disengage from the game the night before and then re-engage with some sort of game. If it was cards, he would often play cards with his teammates in an effort to just re-pull everybody's awareness back into the moment. Tiger Woods would play table tennis with the guys on tour because you're touring with your competitors and there's this sense of aggression in the air and competitive nature. So how do you leave the adrenaline so that you can kind of recover yourself? And motorcycles, dirt bikes, those kind of dangerous sports, they have this knack of heightening your senses and pulling your awareness in. So that's very cool. Thank you for that story. I was kind of really curious. You've developed a lot of custom forks over the years. I think I know that you're going to say the Sonic Slider is your favorite, but for someone who's looking at your biofieldtuning.com and looking at like, wow, I would love to play with one, but what is it? What would be that main fork that you would recommend to someone who's starting out?
The Sonic Slider. The Sonic Slider is it's a weighted tuning fork, like so. And it is the Schumann resonance, so 7.83, the Earth's background electromagnetic pulse that the body likes, times 12. You can't make a 7.83 hertz tuning fork because the lower the frequency, the longer the fork. And so it'd be like 4 feet long. So that's really not feasible. But what I did was I played with all of the harmonics, 7.83 times 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. I went up all the way to 14. And the 12th was really just the best, like far and away. Like the 11th was sort of neurotic and the 13th was deadening. And then the 12th was just right. There's something about this frequency, it's 93.96 hertz, that the body just loves. Like most other forks, like for example, this one's 144 hertz. And I love this fork. It's really useful. But if I activate it and put it on myself, like just after a few minutes, like, I feel done with it. But the Sonic Slider, you can just hold on yourself for a long time. Like you just don't get tired of it. And it has so many sort of unique properties. Like I originally created it for vanity. I originally created it as something to like use on the face and the neck and, to just kind of like gua sha, but vibrating. And that was kind of how we put it into the marketplace. But people discovered that it was helping them get rid of their food allergies and sensitivities, that it could be used to speed healing of wounds and injuries, that if you put it on a bug bite immediately and just let the vibration run down, it takes the itch out instantly. So it's got all kinds of great first aid applications for headaches, stomach aches, period cramps. It's just soothing and regulating. And it's got an extra long handle that you can slide on yourself. So kind of like dry brushing. And that just gets everything moving in your system. But you can't hear it, right? It doesn't make a sound. So weighted tuning forks, we don't hear. So that I think is a really good place to start. But then I've got other forks like this one is 222 hertz. So all of my other unweighted forks like this one, the 144, the 174, these are what I call working forks. They get in your field and they immediately start resonating with whatever distortion you've got. But this 222 is one that it's kind of like a bell. It's like a call to presence. It's a great meditation companion. It's not always easy to quiet your mind when you want to sit and be quiet. But if you activate a tuning fork, you have something for your mind to focus on. And so you can just stay present in this sort of alpha brainwave state of listening to the sound as it decays. So want to hear it?
Yeah, for sure.
All right. Right? It's immediately soothing. You can feel your field, but like immediately just start to open. So this fork is, I love you just the way you are. It doesn't point out all the ways you're out of balance. It's just like, I love you just the way you are. Do it again. So this is a good one if you just want to sit and be, which I think is what people need. And you were talking about that need for recovery, that need for the mind to quiet down and to slow down. And just like 15 minutes of sitting with this and just being present with it as the sound goes all the way down, restriking it. It just like chills you out pretty quickly, which I think in this increasingly stressful world, people really need.
I find a lot of my clients, they come to me and they've self-diagnosed and they think they have problems. And I find myself just repeating, like almost like a parrot, that you don't have a problem. Your field needs to be tuned. Your body needs to be tuned. I could play all of the perfect instruments on my guitar, and if I have one string a little off, it's going to sound a little off. And I think that people are very hard on themselves, expecting this like layer of consistency that will never exist within us. And when we see ourselves as an instrument, which is something I say all the time, and I see you saying very similar words, like we're an instrument and we need to tune ourselves, that, as things in our field change, as relationships change, as the stars move around, we find ourselves with different tensions and stressors. And something as simple as having a collection of tuning forks could be a way that they align their space. I love getting massage, but I find myself, the more sensitive I become, I don't really want somebody else's energy. Sometimes I find myself even more aware and more present than the massage therapist. And, I leave there and I don't really feel like I got nourishment. I feel like I kind of resonated a field that they needed for them. And the thing about your tuning forks that I think are so angelic is that it's a clean frequency. And I had this dream recently. I was trying to think of ways to describe the vibration effect of what you're doing, because, here you are, you're just producing a little bit of sound and vibration within people's field. And, unless you've experienced it, you're just kind of like, what is this? Even though it's based in physics and science. And I had this dream, and I just think it's like a cool illustration to talk about. I was in a casino, like I was in this resort casino, but it was underwater and I could breathe underwater, which is interesting because, our air outside of us is the ether and, it's charged with light. You and I are both we already know this. And when we breathe in, our blood turns more red because we breathed in that light. And in the dream, I could put my hand up in the casino. And because of the water waves coming off of the machines, I could feel the machines. And I was experiencing the casino with my hands. And like I could feel the machines that were emanating these vibrations differently in people. And I'm like, this is life. This is actually, so when you're striking, when you're doing a tuning session and you're striking that, you're listening for how the pure sound waves are being affected by people's field. And it's like, if we can just pretend and imagine that we're in water, what you're doing can, I think, be very much accessed by people, which is why you do those workshops. And I was wondering if you had illustrations similar to like just, pretend we're in a body of water. Is that the illustration that you use often?
Well, air is a lot more than we've been taught that it is, right? Our atmosphere is not just a gas, it's a plasma, and it is conducting waves all the time. Sound waves, sound that we can't hear. And we are all responding to that. Every single person has had the experience of getting a bad vibe off of someone or a good vibe off of someone. Every single thing is emanating waves. And the more sensitive you become, like you were talking about in your massage, the more aware you are of how those vibrations are impacting your vibrational field. So our atmosphere is like water in a way. It's just a lot less dense than water. It certainly has water in it. Water is a plasma. And you look at things in the natural world, like insects with their antennas and things like that, and how they are absolutely, everything is just sensing vibes. And I think we've been really disconnected from that connected vibrational reality because of what we've been told, that everything is separate and that there's this empty space in between. And so this whole concept of vibrations has gone into the world of metaphysical or woo-woo, when it's just a matter of fact nature of our reality.
I know there's so much information that you pick up on the biofield. Have you witnessed like dehydration? Like, does dehydration show up in the field in a way that you're like, oh, you need to drink water?
Yeah, definitely. Definitely. In fact, I would say that our biofield is largely water. What we have at that double layer membrane is an accumulation of charge, but also a little bit more water, right? If you think about a soap bubble, what creates that membrane is the water and the tension, the charge. So yes, you can absolutely perceive dehydration in people. In fact, I feel it. I tend to understand what's going on through sympathetic resonance in my own body. So if someone is dehydrated, I will feel dehydrated. I will know that that's what's going on in them because I'm feeling that in myself.
That is so cool. I have like 20 questions for you, and I want to ask the ones that I'm the most excited about. If someone gave you an unlimited budget for a project of your choice at this time in your life, what would that look like?
I would love to have 2 spa healing retreats that have restaurant and a music venue and sort of like a food forest and all the beautiful spa things that I love, both in Vermont, where I have a home, and in Jamaica, where I have a home. And I'd love to create community gathering spaces. I've really been dying to have my own church lately and to do worship together, with voice and sound in congregation. So a gathering space that we could use for that, and maybe some farm animals, and just a place of good food, good vibes, healing, restoration, and community, because I think that's really important. Like, I don't want these things just for myself. I want them so that I can share them in community. And I know as I get older, I'm going to be less inclined to want to travel. And so I have these places where people can come to me and just get better, become more alive, more vibrant, more coherent, really nourished by all the things that nourish us.
That worship word. I know you and I are very scientific online, and I could potentially bury this, never put it on a short, but I am very curious, like, what your relationship is to that, like that word or that sense of God. And if you can elaborate on that, I am personally curious how you kind of connect to that omnipotent love.
I would say that, like you, I project a scientific front because people want to know the science. It's so silly, but that's what's important to people, So I have a nonprofit research. We do peer-reviewed studies. I've certainly formed a hypothesis based in science. But at the end of the day, very fundamentally, I am absolutely guided by God and truly in love with God. I mean, I have a very worshipful, rejoicing, intimate, snuggly relationship with the one light, with that sense of the one that is fundamentally coherent, infinitely patient, incredibly loving, and ever present. And I feel like my work with sound, and especially plasma, because when I discovered our electric body, right, I was educated into a world of solid, liquid, and gas, and I wasn't taught about plasma and ether. And when I uncovered these 2 additional illuminated, connective states of matter, I suddenly stopped being a seeker. I had spent decades in the self-help realm, feeling like something was missing, trying to find the light and the truth. And when I discovered and fully understood plasma and ether, I stopped seeking because I found the light that I was looking for, and it's in me. So your biofield, your electrical system, to me, is this bridge between science and spirituality, because your electrical system is biological. Your electric light is beating your heart. It's keeping your eyes open and shiny. But when you die, your light goes out. What is that light but your electrical system, your biofield, your soul? And if you understand that your electrical system holds all of your memories, because everything you see, smell, touch, taste, everything that you experience is all an electrical impulse in the body. So it's all stored in the electrical system. And that's my biofield map, is this understanding that the biofield is mind, conscious, and subconscious, and that the body is inside the mind. And so if when your biofield exits, it takes all of its memories with it, that really explains these kids who come in and remember past lives and have skills that they developed in past lives. That part of you doesn't die. It simply assumes another human suit and keeps on playing the game. But it brings with it all of the experiences that it previously. And once we, I think, really bridge and understand that we are both biological and what you might call spiritual simultaneously, I think there's a huge relief in that. And for me, understanding that the light in me is like, it's a drop of God. It's the same light that's in the sun and the stars and the lightning and the lightning bugs, that the song of the universe is literally ringing in my cells, that my light being resonant to all light. And that was something that I could really rest in and hold and enjoy, and just through meditation, tune into the music of the spheres, that quiet song that is the totality of the cosmos within us. I think that that's a place of rest. And I think most people don't have that because of this idea that everything is separate and God is separate from man and man is separate from nature. And we're divided within ourselves and divided against each other. And none of it's true. It's all just noise in the signal and misperception.
It's funny how often God comes up in we talk heavily about like research and science, and then it comes to the forefront either in the form of love or the form of energy or the form of plasma. And I appreciate your insight on it. For me, I have a difficult relationship with the word God, but I have a very easy relationship with the world field, angels, and patterns. And when I talk about it with my friends, I'm like, I don't believe it's a patriarchal, masculine, sentient being that's, choosing certain things. I think it's an algorithm that we coexist in. And it works like a matrix, and there's a give and take, and there's a balance within it. And so exploring other people's relationship to that omnipresent thing that we're all connected in is,
I didn't use
Mm-hmm.
the word God for a long time.
Okay.
Because I kind of wet my teeth on the new age when I was in my 20s, back in the 90s. And you didn't say God. You said things like source and universe. And what I find with those words, when I say source, it's in my head, it's in my face. When I say God, it's in my chest, it's in my heart.
Yeah.
So as a sound therapist and someone who pays close attention to sounds, to words, the word God, like the word good or the word dog, they feel good to say. And so even though I don't come from any kind of religious background and I don't have any kind of religious trauma, my parents, the only things that they used words like that for was swears. Jesus Christ. But my parents were not religious in any way. And so I don't have that trauma or that association. But what I do have is a preference for the word. And so I always frame it and say, I'm not talking about the God that you don't believe in, that's Christian or whatever, or patriarchal. Yeah. Like, that's not my God. This is what my God is. It's a unified field. It's the fundamental coherence that we would call love, that everything is formed from, arises in, falls back into. The essential nature of the one is harmonious. And I just like the word. So that is why I use it, because it is sound healing for me to use that word instead of the alternatives.
I can't believe we got here, but I want to bring it up now. When I had my old band was called Enter the Stargate, and we sang in a language called Enochian, because I don't like singing words. I feel like consonants actually chop the vibration. Vowels keep the vibration either collapsing or expanding. And in Enochian, many of the verses when you invoke, Enochian was downloaded by the sorcerer John Dee and his scryer Thomas Kelly, 16th century language. They sat with an obsidian plate for like 6 months and they tried to communicate with the field of the angels. And, there's still a lot of theory around it, but their case studies was so scientific, like how they entered these meditations, how they tracked it. And then in this day and age, there's a guy in California that was gifted a lot of his journals, and he's, put the language forward in a very interesting way. He's been studying it for the last 30 years, Lon Milo Duquette. And I loved Lon's stuff. We got permission from him to make a song out of the invocation he's been using for 20 years. And in his opinion, in esoteric magic, it's the most powerful thing he's found. And the verses start with pa me fed me drux fam. And like when you mentioned some of the tonics that you guys had found, it was pa me. And it's like, oh, that's very interesting. It sounds like Enochian. And there's a sequential pattern of saying it 7 times. And then we do it in our songs in 5 different octaves, a masculine and a feminine form. And there is an opening that happens. There's a very much a stargate, just like in any ceremonial, old school, sit down if you sit for, Aya or peyote or, mushrooms served by a medicine man, which has 50 years experience. There is a sequence to how things are passed out in the language that is spoken and only rotating around the fire in a certain way. And when you're talking about like these tonics and these like, God, it's, to me, there's always a sequence to different fields and the fields that exist around us. And, the star field, to me, you can access via sound. I think that when we start to play with sound, open vowels, and we develop this charged relationship with plasma. I think we start to bend space and time and our reality to these things. And when we look at like the old school pharaohs, they were standing in these pyramids that, I could argue in my own little theory that they were connecting to certain starlights to hold that vibration and pull that vibration of Osiris or Isis down into them to become embodiments. When we look at ourselves as these hollow tubes, what we start to develop a relationship is how clean is the field, how coherent is the field. And you had mentioned the story recently about this astrologer that's an apprentice of yours, and he did your biofield tuning in a 12-foot circle and found your star chart. And I am just wondering how that has developed over time for you, like in the last few months, how, if that's tweaked anything for how you relate to the field.
Well, it's a very interesting journey of discovery that I've been on. And one of the things that I realized, this was a number of years ago now, but I was just sitting in meditation and I realized that the biofield has 12 bands, that it isn't smooth like an apple, it's ribbed like a pumpkin. And that these bands flow through our central channel and then around the perimeter of our field. And I saw that each of these 12 bands was comprised of 12 strands, kind of like fiber optic lights. And so that leads to these 144 illuminated strands of light circulating through our central channel. So when people talk about 144 strand DNA, that's what I see it as, this circulating light. And then when I was contemplating the 12 bands from above, I realized that it looked like an astrological chart. And I started thinking about the metaphor of 12 around one, the 12 disciples of Christ, the 12 knights of the round table, the 12 gods of the pantheon. And I started wondering if we could assign characteristics to each of these segments that were created, and then realized that we could actually place the astrological chart superimposed on it. And so I started working with an apprentice who is also an astrologer. And I came up with the idea of having him superimpose my chart onto my field. And so we weren't together. We were doing this over Zoom, but he created a 12-foot circle in his space, divided it up into the 12 houses, opened up my chart, and then proceeded to walk around the inside of the circle with the tuning forks. And much to our amazement, but not really, all of the luminaries appeared in the houses. And this is very tangible from the tuning forks. Anybody who works with tuning forks knows that as you pass them through a medium, you encounter vibrational information of what is invisible but present. It's like an invisible ink decoder, and it makes audible what is invisible. It's so fascinating. It's why I've stuck with tuning forks for so long. It's because they are endlessly fascinating. You wouldn't think, right? You hear tuning fork, you're like, whatever. But it opened up a whole world for me that just continues to go on and on. Anyway, he went around my chart, tuning all of the different luminaries. And in each house, I could feel the characteristics of each house. I could feel the qualities of the luminaries that we were encountering. And when he finished up, when he came back around through the 12th house and back into the first house, I felt really different. I almost felt like what they call a walk-in, where it was suddenly like a different consciousness in my own body. And what I've figured out from having tuned the charts of a number of people now is that each time you do a chart tuning, it seems to focus in on one of your inner archetypes and amplify and clarify that archetype. So I would say that one of my primary archetypes is the warrior. And when I came out of that session, I felt like a Jedi. I like wielding my lightsaber on the battlefield, just effortlessly slaying everything in sight. And it just showed up in my ability to like get to all those little tasks, those little piles of things that you just don't do or you avoid. I was just like slaying freaking everything in sight from such a cool, embodied, centered place. One of the next people we did it on is a friend we have in common, India Ari, the musician. And she already very much embodies a queen archetype. But when we finished with her and we worked on her together in person, she was just so regal. She was just so embodied in that queen archetype. Like, it was just so evident. So it is a fascinating process. And I'll tell you another kind of cool, weird thing that happened when I decided to tune my own chart and go the other way around, starting in the 12th house and coming back around to the first. And I got to my 10th house where I have Sun and Mercury conjunct each other at 22 degrees. And Sun and Mercury get along, but there was all of this tension between them. And I was like, why is this here? And I had to consult Mustafa about it. And he said, there's nothing wrong with those. It's the fact that you have Saturn in opposition of those two at 22 degrees. And so it's that Saturn opposition that's creating the tension. And so we got together and I had him hold Saturn down in my 4th house and I held the Sun and Mercury in the other. And that, those red lines in your chart, right? Where there's like, all of a sudden that whole feeling of tension collapsed and went up into this sort of harmonious arc. And I was like, wow, this is a way to like deal with the hard aspects of your chart and get them to soften and come in better relationship. The other thing that's really interesting is that we tend to think of the stars and their influence on us as being something that's way out there. But if you realize that they are electromagnetic formations in your own biofield, that they are right around you. And that's one of the things I've heard is that the stars are the furthest aspect of yourself that you can see. It's like this fractal projection of what is actually going on in our own electric bodies, that their influence becomes that much more real. And you were saying earlier about how the stars move around us and we're different people every day. I just went through this really wild experience of Saturn moving from Pisces into Aries, and my Chiron, my wounded healer, is at 0 degrees of Aries. And I got Saturn changing signs crossing my Chiron right at the time where I had this injury. And so felt it, right? I was so aware of what was happening and how that was impacting my movement, my perception, my expression of self in that moment. So I think that this idea that the luminaries are right in your own electrical system makes the impact of astrology just so much more real and immediate.
I'm so excited to see how this develops for you over time. I work with archetypes. So I do like an old school Carol Jung technique of moving people through the glossary of archetypes, having them choose it, and then we cast it in their houses, which is kind of like flipping astrology on its head. So instead of talking to people about planets, which maybe they don't relate to, we talk to them about personality archetypes, like types of themselves that are non-negotiables. If you washed up on an island, the things that you would manifest and pull through. And when I heard your story of doing it, I was like, oh, I want that done. Because to me, it's always about coherence. How do we make the field more coherent? Because as there's surges of energies, as we expand and contract, if there's flow within our chart, we just adapt, we grow, we can embody. And looking at it from that extra lens, I think can help people relate to the map. It's not just past, future. It's not just mom, dad, and ancestors and descendants. But now it's all of a sudden the universe is within us. And we are that like 13th cord that's holding all of the cords together.
Exactly.
When you say there's 144 strands, can you just like illustrate what you mean by that kind of connect between the 12 bands? It's funny, you and I have the same thing and I was just looking for it. The toroid metal field. So is it the relationship to each of those? I was trying to picture it.
Yeah. So the 12 bands go through and then the center, right, becomes the 1, the 13th, or the 1 that is the embodiment of it. So, and then if you think of each of these bands has 12 strands, then it becomes that 144 circulating through the middle. And this energy flows bi-directionally because we draw up negative charge from the surface of the earth, and that arises through, that's the ascending current. We draw in positive charge from the sun, and that descends. So this current is flowing bi-directionally, both through the center and the outer boundary. And that is what creates the structure of our bodies and our minds, our beings.
That's so great. I know that we're kind of ending our time. I have 2 more questions for you, if you don't mind. The last time you and I got to hang out in person, we had a long conversation about nourishment as a giver. And I've had so many thoughts about how we can recover. And as I've dived, deeper into this adrenaline and dopamine conversation, I've been assigning a lot of my athletes and artists to become forward. And since our conversation, I was wondering if you had any enlightenment on, the givers I feel like there's a lot of beacons that are in my audience that are serving their communities. What is something that you would recommend them doing to help pull themselves back into a state of nourishment after they've given?
Giving yourself permission to rest, giving yourself permission to contract, giving yourself permission to not have to talk. Certainly, talking takes a lot of energy. I think a lot of people, myself included, who are givers, it's very often coming from some kind of wound. And that I know certainly my tendency to be an overgiver very much from core trauma. I think that we are programmed with this feeling like we need to stay busy, like we need to remain lovable, we need to take care of everybody. It becomes a compulsion. And we end up doing it even when it's not necessary or appropriate. So I think it's really important to be able to discern if you are knee-jerk giving or if you are genuinely moved to be a giver. And it's really important that we really open ourselves to receive, because you end up in energetic debt if you don't let yourself receive. This is something that I really see, that if people have spent a lifetime giving and not receiving, at some point or another, that karma comes back to you. And then maybe you have to receive people taking care of you because you can no longer take care of yourself, right? And that's where that debt gets repaid. That to just remember the importance of keeping the balance of giving and receiving. And even if that's just graciously receiving a compliment or letting somebody buy you lunch, right? Because sometimes that knee-jerk rejection of receiving comes up. And I think it's really important to remember that gracious receiving gives dignity to the act of giving. If you end up with a whole bunch of givers and no receivers, what are we even doing? So if somebody wants to give something to you, that you graciously receive it and gratefully receive it and really let that in. And I know that it takes an effort to do that. I think for me, as the years have gone on and I've been at public events, people would come up to me and just lavish me with love and gratitude and appreciation. And I had to very consciously open my heart more and more in order to really receive what people were very earnestly and genuinely giving to me. So understanding that maybe it doesn't come naturally to be a receiver and that it does take effort, but that it's so necessary. And it's so necessary to honor the giver, right? Mm-hmm. Because if you try to give and somebody rejects it, that doesn't feel good. So it's just super important to understand that it might take a little extra effort to do that, but that you can.
That's great advice. I think I needed to hear that advice too. I know that podcasts are often like a very steered conversation through the basics of your work. And I really wanted to avoid that with you. I feel like my audience are seekers and you have a lot of, how did you fall into this work and what is biofield tuning? And I wanted to take us into a new realm, and I wanted to kind of sit with your current curiosities and fascinations and how you're developing the work as an artist and a visionary where you're birthing a new modality. And I really see you as Queen Eileen, and like there'll be portraits of you in the future museums and you'll be with your tuning forks as a sorceress, But I wanted to know if there is something that you wanted to unbox. I have a very educated audience. There's a lot of doctors and therapists that are just kind of staying tuned into what's on the edge for fascia and performance arts. What is it that you would want to say to them?
I think this model of electric health is really where we're going. And electric health, understanding that your biofield, the rhythms, the patterns, the flows in your electrical system are really primary. Like all the chemistry in the body is downstream of that. I went through menopause 8 years ago from an electric health perspective, and the word hormones never entered my mind, never came out of my mouth. I solved my challenges with menopause electrically very quickly, very easily, by being grounded, by using the sonic slider, by peeing outside, by taking care of my electrical system. It's just such a more elegant model of health to treat the electricity, the vibrational nature of your body and your being. And when we get our vibes in harmony, then the body follows suit. And I think achieving our potential, maximizing the efficiency, optimizing our physiology really all happens at this electrical level. There's been so much nonsense in the last decades, this denial of the biofield, which I think is absurd. And I think it's really important that people familiarize themselves with the electrical system, with the concepts of plasma and ether, and be able to speak confidently about it. Because we've been really sidelined with this idea of like, we don't know what subtle energy is, and we don't know what the energy is in energy medicine, and then we don't understand it. And that's willful ignorance. It's electricity. Electricity is the same thing. It's just from an Eastern perspective, they recognize that the higher harmonics of the electrical current is also in play. There's just an understanding of the more nuanced aspects of electricity that were even defined by James Clerk Maxwell 100 and however many years ago. He developed 20 equations to describe the nature of electricity and electromagnetism through, I think, what was a very intuitive awareness, a very inspired intuitive awareness and connection to the nature of this part of our reality. And those equations were reduced to just 4 by Oliver Heaviside. Right. So the deeper understanding of subtle electricity has already been discovered. It's been explained. It's just been removed as we've been really patterned into this chemical mechanical way of looking at things. I worked with a friend of mine recently, and she had all of these issues with her gallbladder being sort of jammed up. And she tried all of these cleanses in order to let it go and hadn't gone anywhere. But in my work, the gallbladder relates to anger over lack of support from the father. And so I did a tuning with her and went back to when she was 13 and her dad left her mom and he went to India, and the rage that she internalized from that experience that was still being held in her field and that was informing her gallbladder. And so by working with our electrical system, by working with the field of the gallbladder, I was able to get that pattern of tension to release. And at the end of the session, I did a little traction, and she said she felt her gallbladder open up and all of this movement suddenly happen in it. Right? Now, you can drink celery juice, you can do all kinds of things, but you're not going to release that tension. And it is tension in our wiring that creates most of the problems that we have. So when we get in at that deeper, more formative, more causative level and fix things there, the physical body is downstream of that. So the more that all of us who are educators or athletes or people like you and me understand and work with and describe and give validity to the electrical system, the faster we'll move into this paradigm where healing is a lot more immediate and a lot more elegant.
That's so well put. I love it. And I love the confidence in which you deliver it from nothing but just true experience. There is no shame in your game. You're not just like, sound heals you. You're just like, listen, this is the future. And it's such a hopeful future, in my opinion. And I want to commend you for the work that you're outlining for the next generations. And I know that, you and I are both moving towards the beat of a different drum, and we're just staying focused on that. And it's kind of hard sometimes to just receive compliments because you're in the faucet of enthusiasm, which is, possession by God. And in my opinion, when you're standing at the center of the toroidal field and you're working on your coherence, that's the energy you emit as you walk the path. You're enthusiastic. It's just coming into you, and your life is a projection of that moving forward. But thank you for doing the hard work of showing up each day for yourself in order to hold that for the rest of us, because you are creating a vocabulary that will be leaned upon for centuries to come. And what a pleasure to just, sit down and break bread with you over it. And thanks for taking time out of your incredibly busy schedule in your empire for this podcast. So in your show notes, you have 3,500 practitioners around the world, and it's just counting. And thank you for the language that you're birthing for the rest of us. I appreciate you so much.
Yeah. Thanks so much, Brooke. It's such a pleasure to hang out and chat with you.
Dude, I would love to do, by the way, a mighty breath, mighty voice, vocal toning on some ancient land with you. So hard. It's on my vision board, honestly.
That gave me chills. So yes, let's just plan it.
Yeah. I am my mighty breath gets people, I teach them to sing in a shape, to use the rib cage like an accordion. So my audience will be your loudest singers, let me tell you. So I love to be involved in any way that I can. But thank you for your time and energy. And I love you so much.
Love you, Brooke. Thanks.